Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here on ESPN Esports. We are live on Twitter and on Twitch, also the ESPN app and on YouTube. This is Coach's Corner. This, every single Monday, is where we dive into the life of a coach, what it's like coaching a professional esports team, what it's like leading them to success, and everything surrounding it. I'm very excited because this is the first time we are venturing into League of Legends. I hope we do this a lot more, and I couldn't think of a better place to start, especially with the way the team has performed so far in Summer Split. A perfect 2-0 to start the season, and oh yeah, a perfect game to add to that as well. We got Artemis, who is a coach for Evil Geniuses, joining us right now, riding high in the LCS. The perfect game, my friend. Wow, a perfect game.
Arda,
your
how's it going?
first one in your career too, by the way, right?
Yeah, and I don't think that's uncommon because there's only been 5 perfect games in the history of the NALCS, and there hasn't been a perfect game since LCS franchise. So yeah, super excited to be here and super excited with our start.
Yeah, we are very happy to have you here. Can't wait to dive into all things coaching with you. But tell me about that. I want to know what the pop-off was like. You were mentioning off camera that the team is together. The team is able to be in the same room while they're playing their games. So when the perfect game was achieved this past weekend, tell me what that mood was like. What were the players saying?
You know, it's funny. So when we're listening to the comms, we're about like 3 minutes ahead as far as what we're hearing, and we don't have a coach's stream set up just yet because of the difficulties with being remote. So I'm hearing what's happening live, but I'm not like seeing what's happening live. And this was maybe 5 or 6 minutes into the game where we had just executed our tactics on top side, and at the same time we had blocked their counterplay on bot side. It was the first time that Bang and Zazel 2v3'd Wiggly and CLG's bot lane. And at that point, this was like 6 minutes in the game or something, I said to the other staff in our call, like, holy shit, this might be a perfect game. And I did. And the reason that I was so confident is because of the practice we've been having this past week. Like, our guys are playing with so much discipline right now and so much confidence that I knew that if we executed that, they really had no counterplay left. And so obviously, like, the game finished, and like I was running to the room, and I didn't know for sure if it was a perfect game until I got into the room because like we could have dove the fountain or something. So I wasn't totally sure. But the guys were just really happy with the win. They were happy with the 2-0. And I don't think they fully like understood like the gravitas of a perfect game. Like, I don't think that they really knew how special it actually was. So I think it was mostly me and the coaching staff that was so excited about the perfect game. For them, like they definitely enjoyed it and they knew that they did a good job and they were proud. But I don't think they fully understood the significance until they looked back on it and reflected after.
Well, hopefully they do in years to come when they realize that this was quite the achievement to happen at such a high level of competition, right? So you mentioned there, that's interesting how you mentioned about how the team is really clicking and gelling right now. For me, when I look back on Evil Genius's spring split, it really felt like, especially the second half of the season, in particular, like around March, it felt like Evil Geniuses was unstoppable at times. Jizuke was firing on all cylinders. The team was battling for that second spot, for playoff contention, getting that second spot and having a good run in the playoffs as well. What about internally? Like, when did you start to realize, and how are you creating that path such that the players were really starting to feel comfortable with each other, that chemistry was building? When did you start to feel that?
Back in spring. Yeah, so long. So many things have happened since then. I think that it was around week 5 or week 6, maybe even week 4 in practice, where things like really started clicking for us. And at the beginning of the split, we were struggling with basically our strategic direction, right? Like, how do we want to play the game as 5? And like reconciling those perspectives to kind of consolidate that into one cohesive play style was difficult for us because we had essentially 3 very distinctive cultures where we had Bang and Irene, who have like an LCK background with like LCK style of macro. We have the Cloud9 trio, which was more actually like a Cloud9 duo with Zazel and Svenskeren. They really didn't have too much experience playing with Kumo. They just had a couple games with him when Licorice was injured. So people used to say, oh, Cloud9 trio, synergy between these 3 players. That's not really the case. It was mostly just synergy between Dennis and Tristan, our support and jungle. And then we also had Jizuke, who's bringing in his own very unique play style, very aggressive laner, loves to punish his enemy laner for all of their mistakes, especially in the early game. And it was a challenge for us to actually consolidate these perspectives into a cohesive play style. And it's something we didn't want to rush. We knew that we would get there as long as we took the correct approach. And I'm very happy that we did that because we're seeing the fruits of the labor now.
So for you as a coach, what is your role in that to try and put all these pieces together, and what sort of approach do you take in trying to, solve this jigsaw puzzle of making the best team possible with the pieces you have?
Well, it's very, very difficult, right? And it's incredibly nuanced, and it's probably like a 2-hour segment just talking about it. But I think where it starts is you have to fully understand each other. The first step is understanding. So I have to be able to fully understand the perspectives of all 5 of my players, all of the coaches, all the analysts we have working together, and make sure that they can articulate themselves correctly so there's no misunderstandings. And once we have this like big picture understanding where everybody can now see explicitly how their teammates feel about the game, how their teammates think that we should win the game or how we should approach the game tactically, and how the coaches feel about these questions as well, that's where you can start actually like getting into discussions or arguments or debates about high-level concepts like strategy and like tactics and kind of like the fundamentals that make a team good. It doesn't really matter what that is. It really depends on your players, and each team kind of has a different flavor to the game, and you get that through compromise, and that's the next step. So for me, a lot of what I do is helping the players articulate their positions, and then also like leading and mediating these discussions, these really hard and difficult discussions where players, they need to feel comfortable to voice their opinions, and they need to feel comfortable getting in arguments and discussions with each other. I know that a lot of teams can shy away from conflict at times, or like they don't have leaders within the team that can handle conflict productively, and that can really be the detriment to the team because conflict is a necessary piece of the team building puzzle. It's absolutely necessary. And some of our biggest breakthroughs as a team come after, hour and a half long discussions that really, really centers on like 1 or 2, maybe 3 players who are sort of have some like binary opposition in how they feel the game should be played. And they almost feel that they can't reconcile with each other. And in these cases, it's my job to unpack their perspectives and somehow find a compromise that can lead us in the direction that ultimately the coaches feel we should be going. So I hope that's not a non-answer, but again, this is such a nuanced process. Like team building, you could try the same team building tactics with the same 5 guys twice and have totally different results because of just how organic the team building process is. So it's something that I study at length in sports, in business, around the world from leaders, educators, performers, and just try and synthesize all these different perspectives and bring that into my esports coaching.
And actually, I was going to mention that I find your attention to detail very admirable. I was actually listening to some interviews with you. You did one with Azento actually recently where you were talking about how you wanted to learn more about how to coach remotely. Like this is such a unique circumstance that we're in, and you happen to be a coach. I mean, you can be with your team a little bit more now because they're all in one place, but like just the idea of teaching and motivating remotely, and you were listening to some podcasts and reading some books. What were some pieces of advice that you took away?
I think one of the big ones is just how important being candid is with your players and how important just brutal honesty is for the sake of honesty. I think that is something that's really helped me in this split, and it's really helped me just in my whole career as a coach. You really can't shy away from these difficult conversations. And the more you're willing to be vulnerable with a player, like the more you're willing to put yourself out there and have these difficult conversations, the more they can start to respect you, and the more they can start to understand that you actually like do care about them as a human. And there's more to you than just the guy who yells at them when they're making mistakes in practice, right? But it's more than that too. I think that the strategies for how you can stay connected to somebody while you're remote are very complex. And like you mentioned, I was learning a lot from business leaders around the world because if you think of like a boardroom or a meeting room, how many companies are there globally with so much capital at their disposal they can throw into research and they can throw into, optimizing these practices so they don't lose productivity. Because when you're losing productivity in a capitalistic society, you're losing dollars, right? So there's a lot of money and there's a lot of research being done to keep businesses like functioning optimally during the pandemic. And I was fortunate enough to kind of come across a lot of these research and read a lot of these articles in journals and expose myself to these new ideas that, if not are directly applicable, they're definitely like challenging my perspectives.
I know that, this is such an extraordinary time that we're living in. How have your players and even yourself, like how have you guys adjusted to not only just online play, but just living in a pandemic like we are?
It's hard, man. I mean, I'll speak for myself first and foremost. It's been difficult. Especially the off season, like competition in my work is very core and central to my identity. I love my job so much and I love my players so much. And not having that in addition to being isolated completely, I was taking the pandemic very seriously with my social distancing and my shelter at home for the sake of my parents, who I hope to visit in some months. They're in their late 60s. And for me, like, there might be some level of acceptable risk but for my loved ones and for everybody else's loved ones, I don't think that there is a level of acceptable risk. I think that's zero. So it was a challenging time. I definitely felt isolated. I definitely felt lonely for maybe the first time in my life, which was a challenge, in itself. But thankfully now we're back in the season and I have my players to lean on and they can lean on me and we can use the support structures that I think we were all missing when it came to pandemic, because it was tough.
So we're into summer split. Perhaps some people might consider this to be a surprise signing. Maybe not so much due to your history with the guy, but Evil Geniuses brings in Huni, right? And then this, of course, brings questions about the number of import players that can be fielded. And then now we have a Huni Deftly situation, Bang Kumo situation. What are the conversations? Where I want to start there is, what were the conversations like with Huni? Because it's fascinating to me that he could go from being, for all intents and purposes, the highest paid player in the league to now being somebody who is battling for a starting spot and playing in academy. So how do those conversations go in the offseason to have him buy into what the team is projecting to do in summer?
I'll start this answer with a story about me and Huni when we were playing together at Clutch Gaming during our gauntlet run where we eventually qualified for Worlds. It's the semifinal against Team Liquid, and we were not expected to beat Team Liquid. We were the 9th place team at the start of the split. Miracle made our way into playoffs, and we weren't even expected to take games off them, and we find ourselves in the most competitive series that TL has probably played up to this point. They're getting challenged every game. I think every side selection game has been won up until this point, and it's now game 5. Team Liquid goes back to side selection, and they beat us pretty convincingly, if I remember correctly, in the game 5, a pretty crushing defeat. I think they had the better draft. And I remember after the game, Huni just was crying on stage, and I started crying, and I hugged him, and we were both crying, and he just wanted to win the finals of NA so badly, and I wanted to win it for him. And it was, just seeing the emotion that he had and how badly he wanted to win. And, we were this close to beating Team Liquid and making our way to finals, and it was something that he's always wanted to do, is win a North American championship. And, I'll never forget that moment, that's for sure. And that is a big reason that Huni decided to play Evil Geniuses. We're not paying Huni $2.3 million to play an academy, and I'm not going to talk about the exact contract structure. But Huni made the choice to come to Evil Geniuses. He chose to come here, and I think that he did have other options. But Huni is a fantastic player. He's a fantastic leader. And part of what makes that and part of what encompasses that is his desire to win and be the best. And Huni chose to come to Evil Geniuses because he wants to win a North American championship. And he thought that he had the best chance to do that here. And he was willing to sacrifice and do whatever it took to make that happen. And if we wanted him to coach Kumo and play an academy for a year, he was going to do it. And if it comes next year, Kumo is still our guy, and Kumo is now better than Huni, and we decide to go with Kumo again, then, he'll have to, reconcile with that. And I'm sure that there'll be a place for him here because of, the kind of person and the kind of player that he is. So for me, signing a player like Huni was an absolute no-brainer, and I'm super, super happy to have him here.
That's very good to hear, very interesting to hear as well, because whenever there's a dollar figure attached to a player, particularly when it's an outlier, people often might make the mistake or just assume that money is what's most important. But you're saying that for Huni, winning is most important.
Absolutely. Huni took a significant and serious pay cut to come here. He is not getting paid, astronomical figures to play for us in academy, that's for sure. And again, I don't want to get into the structure of the contract, sure. But he came here to win. That was very clear. He didn't come here for money or a paycheck. If he wanted a paycheck, he would have gone to a team like I don't know, one of these bottom feeder teams who isn't afraid to just kind of sit in 6th to 8th place. But that isn't something that EG's about.
Fair enough. I won't ask you to name particular bottom feeding teams. We'll just leave it at that. That's perfect.
I think everybody does.
Yeah, fair enough. I think people can make their own assumptions. Okay, so how will this work then in the summer split? Like, as a coach, what are you going to be looking for if these are the defined packages, as you have said, Huni, Deftly, Bang Kumo, right? What are you going to be looking for? What are you monitoring on a week-by-week basis? Or is it a strategic matchup thing? Are you going to be looking at the schedule and you're going to say, actually, maybe Huni and Deftly will be a better combination to play against this particular team? Like, how are you going to parse all of that?
It's a challenging process, that's for sure. And obviously the biggest variable here is performance. We have to, use our eyes, use our stats team, use our data analytics team, and try and encompass the performance of these players and somehow kind of translate this into like wins. I think like a great analogy for baseball fans out there is WAR, or wins above replacement. And, we really want to be able to look at these rosters and kind of consider what the plus minuses of these players and where we are at the end of our 9-week season. But at the same time, there's some friction here because in a typical League of Legends practice week, you only have 4 days of practice and 4 or 5 game blocks. So that's 20 games. And that's not a lot of games. It's not a lot of preparation, especially on new patch weeks if you need to test things. So there is always this fight that as much as you want to see both rosters, as much as you want to gauge both performances on any given week, you're essentially incentivized to pick a core 5 and stick with that in practice so you can make progress quicker than you otherwise would. So at the beginning of our season, we were splitting time with both packages evenly. I would even say that there were some weeks or some periods that we were favoring the Huni Deftly roster because that was the more unknown roster and we just needed more data. Like we just simply needed more data to see how that works. And I'm very, very pleased with the results. I thought both rosters were functioning at a very high level, and they both have very distinct strengths and weaknesses that I don't want to get too much into just for strategic reasons. But this is something that you will absolutely see come playoffs. I think that having a 7-man roster gives us so much flexibility come postseason, especially if there's like a long break between, if we get bye weeks, things like this, like depending on our seeding, we can have long periods of time where we can be practicing without the pressure of playing a best of one, 2 best of ones every week, right? That there's a lot of variance involved in that. And so a lot of what we do in practice is try and have a focused practice week so we can remove a lot of the variance that comes with a best of one. But once we get to playoffs, once we can kind of extend our practice weeks into the 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, depending on our bye week and things like this, we can really start to, essentially dictate the strategy based on matchups like you alluded to and use these packages in the same series even, depending on side selection or depending on performance of individual players or perspectives sitting on the bench versus playing, things like this. So I think the optionality is the name of the game for us, and we're definitely looking forward to having these options available to us, especially come playoffs.
Do you, as a coach, do you prefer or are you enjoying the challenge of having these 2 packages and putting all of that together and see how that's going to flow summer split? Or do you enjoy having one focused team of 5 that you are molding like you did last split?
I think the answer is kind of both, because I enjoy the challenge of making this 7-man roster work with these 2 packages. So much time was spent in the offseason with myself and Andrew Barton, our general manager, talking about and building out systems where we can, essentially eliminate the externalities that are associated with using active subs or using a 7-man roster. We've seen time and time again in the history of League of Legends that people do not like sitting on the bench. Just using Svenskeren because he's my player, he's an easy example. He didn't want to play for Cloud9 anymore. He was sick of sharing his spot with Blabber. He's like, look, one of us is gone, but like, give me a starting spot because I'm sick of being an active sub. We can look at TSM, where they were using 2, ended up being 3 junglers at the end of their split, and that was an absolute, tragedy. It was chaos, and there was numerous externalities associated with their kind of failure to communicate to their players properly about what they were doing with their 7-man. So we knew that the only way that we could have success with this 7-man was keeping communication channels wide open and proactively, keeping them maintained so they're there before you need them, so that once there is friction and once players do have something to say, that they have these channels available to them and they feel comfortable reaching out to you and kind of speaking candidly about something that might be a rather difficult conversation. So from, I guess, like a growth perspective and like for myself, it was incredibly challenging, like a process-wise. And I'm very, very pleased with the systems we created in the offseason. I'm very pleased with the results of these systems because I do think that we've managed the externalities very well. That being said, I prefer the 5-man roster. I think that because of the 20-game practice week, you really, really shouldn't be splitting your games. I think it's very important to have a focused week of practice. And for these reasons, I do prefer a 5-man roster.
What, as much as you're willing to tell us here, like what will happen in, say, like elimination games or playoff games or games that matter near the end of the season? We need a win here in order to make the playoffs. Like, how will those kind of matches impact your decision making?
The best team will play. And the team that we have the most confidence in is the staff, and the team that has the most confidence in each other. I think that's a big one. That's the team that will play. And right now, my team of 5 right now, these core 5 have so much confidence in each other. We're just, overflowing with confidence and enthusiasm and intensity in practice that there really is no need to make changes while we're functioning at such a high level. So, and I don't think that this is necessarily even separate from the 7-man. I do think that it has a motivational component to it for not even just the active subs, but for all 7 of these guys. So yeah, I'm excited about what it's done to the environment, and I'm excited for the results that we see this weekend.
So how much will the standings of the teams themselves factor in? Evil Geniuses, the LCS team, went 2-0. Academy team went 0-2 this weekend. So how much will that factor into which package gets the LCS slots?
I guess the LCS performance does matter. I will say that. Like, we came across a 2-0, but the quality of the wins were exceptional. I think the 100 Thieves game, we had a very, very difficult draft to execute. I thought they had the much easier draft, and despite us having very clear win conditions that were modeled after our practice that week, there were still chances we could lose that game if we didn't play in crazy amounts of discipline for the first 25 minutes. It was a very, very challenging game, and I was sweating more than the players, because I think after I knew, even watching it, how difficult and how challenging this game would be for them to win, and they executed immaculately. And then come Sunday, come Saturday, we have a perfect game against CLG. It's the most proud I've been of a roster, maybe not counting qualifying for Worlds or things like this. But if you look at the quality of the wins that we had, I think that it's very clear how practice is going, and it's very clear, the roster that has the most trust in each other, because you don't just kind of stumble your way to a perfect game. It's never been done before in the franchise era of LCS. So that's a testament to our practice, and it's more than that. It's a testament to these 5 players and how hard they're working. So I'm very, very proud of them and excited to work with them again this week.
Just a couple more questions on this, because I do have some questions about your career to ask as well. What do the other players say about this arrangement? What does Sven Skaren and Jizuke and Zazel say about the possible switches, the top lane and bot lane switches that could be happening throughout the season?
I think they're hot and cold on it, which makes a lot of sense to me. For them, it's both disruptive, because they all would obviously prefer to have a core 5 the same way I do. All players recognize the importance of the quantity of games in addition to the quality, and they want to have a core 5 that they can build trust with, they can build chemistry with, and they feel like they can improve with. And for the 3 to have to adjust to 2 people and then readjust to 2 people and then go back and forth, that is a big challenge for those 3. So I think that they very much prefer having a core 5. But at the same time, they also recognize the benefits of using the 7. They recognize the benefits to our practice environment, and they recognize the direct benefits to Kumo when he has a practice partner like Huni to work with. So as much as they are, I guess, resistant to it, they are understanding. And again, it's all about communication. We've let them air their grievances. We've encouraged them to be totally honest with us about how they feel in the moment and give their thoughts on both rosters, give their thoughts on how practice is going. And we've really tried to integrate all of these guys into the decision-making process and make sure that they feel like they have a voice.
I know that you mentioned earlier in the interview that you don't want to give too much away for strategic purposes. M. Breyer asks in the chat, what is the different look that Huni and Deftly would give to this Evil Geniuses roster?
That's a good question. So I think that I'll answer from the communication perspective and not tactically, but Huni is, he's one of the smartest minds of the game that I've ever coached. He's an exceptional mind for the game. He thinks about the game at a very high level, very coach-like as well, I will say, as far as how he can change his risk tolerance in the game, kind of on the fly, depending on different conditions in the game. And he also is a very effective communicator. He's not afraid to be directive with his teammates when necessary. He can pull people around the map. He can direct people. He can make decisive calls. He's a playmaker. He has a lot of agency when he's on the Rift. And because of that, he has a lot of gravity associated with him. He kind of pulls people towards him a lot of the time. And when you have somebody like Bang in the bot lane, maybe you don't really want to be pulling all of your resources away from the 2-time world champion, who's probably the best mechanical AD carry in the league, right? You probably want to play to his side. So, and definitely his strength is his communication, his teamwork above all else. I think that he's got a great mind for the game, and he is just not afraid to do whatever necessary to win the game. And that he's very one-track minded on what's my job, coach. tell me my job and I'm going to execute exactly what I need to do. And because of this, like they have a very, there's good chemistry in that roster because there's like a clear direction for us in the game. And that is sort of what sets it apart from the Bang roster, who does have its own strengths as well.
So my last question on this is just the communication that we will hear for Evil Geniuses fans that are very curious about what kind of decisions are being made and which rosters will start. What will the communication look like throughout the split? Can they look forward to, clear direction and explanations as to what decisions are being made? How will that work?
You can expect clear communication, but I don't think we're going to over-explain, that's for sure. I do think we will communicate our intentions and we will communicate with you what rosters we'll be using. I think the why will mostly be reserved for internal communication. I think that all our players and all our staff will understand exactly why. They will know all of the reasons we're making our decisions. But for you guys, I think that this might come after the fact. If you're interested, we can talk more about it after this season. But because a lot of these things are sort of protected, but for two reasons. One, strategically for us as coaching staff, we don't really want to tell you. And then also to protect the players too. If somebody is underperforming or performing badly, and that's a reason that we're using one package or the other, that's not really something we would want to make public to protect the player's reputation. So as much as I would love to say we would be totally transparent, I don't think that's the case. I think that we will keep things rather close to the chest as far as our rationale for using these rosters, but I do think that you can expect proactive communication about which roster we'll choose.
I think that's completely fair. I think that's a great answer because I think at the end of the day, people just want to hear at least some sort of reason why decisions are being made and not left out in the cold. So as much as you can tell them, I think that's completely fair. With the remaining time we have, and you've been very gracious with your time, Artemis, we are here on Coach's Corner on ESPN Esports Twitch, as well as the ESPN app and Twitter and YouTube, talking with Artemis, our first League of Legends coach. I'm very excited about this, and I hope that we get to do a lot more, not only with yourself, Artemis, but other League of Legends coaches as well. Let's talk about your experience as a coach and some of your highlights. I think about Clutch Gaming, making it to Worlds. I think about the regional playoffs, going through those three teams and beating TSM in the finals to qualify for Worlds. And then I also think of the group of death. Like, just you get to Worlds and then the groups are announced and it's like, holy moly, you got, what was it? It was Fnatic, it was SKT, it was RNG. It was like, when you heard, can you tell me what your thought was when you heard that group?
It was predestined. There was no shock to me. Like we kind of knew that going into the group draw that we were going to get not a fair shake, and we were going to get that group. But I guess we can just jump into the Worlds experience. I don't think that we were the worst team in that group, actually. I think that we couldn't really translate to what we were working on in practice to stage, but I do feel like we could have beaten RNG. That's probably both our games against RNG I thought were super winnable, and looking back, it's a shame that we weren't able to pick up wins in that group, because I think if we did, it would have totally changed the narrative around us, because we came out of this 06 and people were like, they couldn't really compete. This was like one of the worst teams NA has ever sent, but we were very, very competitive, especially in scrims. I guess I can leak a little bit of it now, but really the only team that was untouchable for us was G2. They were way better than us, that's for sure. We learned a lot from scrimming them, but even some of the top Korean teams like Damwon, we had positive scrim results against where we were maintaining above a 50% win rate. And scrims don't really mean too much, but it does mean at least that you are relatively competitive. But yeah, it was a hell of an experience. I think that for me, I wasn't really trying to judge it as good or bad in the moment, and I still don't. I was just trying to drink everything in and just experience it, because it was a powerful experience. One of my players, Lyra, our jungler, he had been playing professional League of Legends for 7 years, I think, at that point, and he had never gone to Worlds. And I had started this season as last season as an academy coach, and I was called up because of the work I was doing, and the organization noticed that, and they knew that the LCS team needed help, and I was called up to help them. And we ended up qualifying for Worlds, and everybody is just crying. And I've never seen Lyra so emotional. He was trying to do this for 7 years and working so hard. And then here I was, my first year as an LCS coach. I didn't really struggle for this the same way he did. And here I am going.
And the team was struggling at that time, right? Weren't they in 9th place or something at the time?
Absolutely, yeah. We were in 9th place and with no real direction, no real motivation, kind of just treading water. And just the work that we did to get from point A to point B and qualify for Worlds, and just the amount of emotion that I saw in my players. Some people never get to go to Worlds. It's just a sad fact. It's something that's so incredible and so rare that you can go your whole career without ever experiencing it. So for me to do that in my first year as a coach, I just really, really treasured it, because I didn't know if I would ever be back. I think that I'm confident that I will be back after this year and with the direction my career is going and what I've managed to do these past few years, I am very confident I will be back. But in the moment, it was so new and so fresh that I just wanted to drink everything in and experience it.
Let's end on this then. I love that you have a lot of takeaways. You always look for improvements or learning experiences, and you actively seek out knowledge, which is a very admirable trait as a coach. What did you take away from the Worlds experience and coaching your first Worlds like that, that you now apply in your regular coaching?
This sounds super corny, and it sounds like something Yamato said, but you have to be yourself. You just have to be yourself. You have to know who you are as a team, and you can't let the international competition change you. You can't let the stage change you. You can't let the gravitas of the situation change you. You just have to be yourself fiercely. And I think for us, one of our biggest challenges was, when we got to the world stage, we sort of lost what made us good, like what made clutch gaming good in North America. We were like, this isn't going to work internationally. And if you have that sort of mindset, you've already lost. You have to trust yourself, and you have to know that what you do as a team is going to be effective here domestically, and it's going to be effective abroad. So that was one of my biggest takeaways, and it's something I preach to my guys all the time, that exactly how we execute in practice, we're going to execute in the LCS, and we're going to execute the exact same way internationally. And that was a really important takeaway that I'm really grateful for that happened so early in my career.
Well, Artemis, we only scratched the surface here, and we're going to have you back at some point for more interviews. So if you're cool with that, we're going to be knocking on your door a lot.
I'd love to be back. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know the chat was a little active. I really appreciate that, all the questions and all the comments there. But this has been Coach's Corner, another great episode diving into the world of League of Legends with Artemis, coach of Evil Geniuses, a 2-0 start. And by the way, a perfect game. Rip to CLG, but it was a perfect game. And it was excellent. It was a lot of fun to watch as a spectator, and I'm sure that it was a lot of fun for the players. And they'll enjoy it years from now when they look back on it, Artemis. I know that you were probably the one that enjoyed it the most in the moment because you understood the gravity of it. Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget Coach's Corner every single Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern here live on our ESPN Esports channel. And every Tuesday, the Rift Rewind, which is our League of Legends show here on ESPN. A little programming note, this week, only this week, Rift Rewind will be on the ESPN app, YouTube, and Twitter. There will be different programming on Twitch, but normally we are on Twitch every single week as well. Thank you, Artemis. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for having me.